Hello, and a very warm welcome to the STUDIOCANAL Presents podcast. My name is Simon Brew from Film Stories magazine, and this is a regular podcast celebrating one of the biggest and deepest film libraries in the world. STUDIOCANAL's extensive catalogue of films brings together cinema from around the globe, going back over a century. The full library is over 6,000 titles strong, including modern animated classics, The Secret of Kells and the Red Turtle, Mindbender's Source Code and Jacob's Ladder, and quality Friday night fare such as Total Recall and Free Fire. We're going to do our very best to explore it all in this podcast. This time, it's a long overdue exploration of one of cinema's most iconic directors, David Lynch. We're going to be exploring his modern masterpiece Mulholland Drive that recently was placed 8th in Sight and Sound magazine's list of the best films of all time. I'm going to be joined by Leila Latif, a critic, broadcaster, and she's also the host of the Little White Lies podcast, Truth and Movies. Before we start our chat though, join me for a brief journey back to 2001 and Mulholland Drive. Here's a clip.
Yes? May I help you?
Someone is in trouble. Who are you? What are you doing in Ruth's apartment?
She's letting me stay here. I'm her niece. My name's Betty.
No, it's not. That's not what she said. Someone is in trouble. Something bad is happening.
I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast Leila Latif, who's going to chat to me about Mulholland Drive and the world of David Lynch. But Layla, it's a tradition on this podcast that we have to start with a film fact about yourself, and I think yours relates to birthday parties.
Yeah, my dad had a projector and a load of speakers, so we used to, pretty much for all of our birthdays, invite our friends around as kids, and we'd all sit and kind of watch a movie in the garden, which was lovely. But because I was kind of a budding, young, quite pretentious cinephile, like, looking back, some very, very inappropriate choices. I think 12th birthday was Scream. Blair Witch Project definitely came up, probably like age 11 or something. And then I think the last one, at which point they'd become quite unpopular events, was Christopher Nolan's Memento, which is told backwards by a person who is like has no sense of memory, and then there's this big twist at the end. And I remember saying to people, you know, these other teenagers that probably just wanted to watch like a Superman movie, like, no, you got to stay for the end. It all really comes together in this kind of art housey movie that's told backwards. But you know, I had fun. That's what I wanted to do.
What did the invites look like? Did you go full on?
Oh, yeah. No, I used to kind of, in early days of like clip art and stuff. And so I kind of put together like what would look like a very, very bad movie poster.
So you sent clip art invites to a teenager's birthday party to watch Memento?
Yes.
Okay, that's going to take some topping.
That is my villain origin story.
So tell us when you first fell in love with the work of David Lynch.
I believe the first thing I watched was actually The Elephant Man. And that was because I was such a huge Mel Brooks fan of all things.
No, I get that.
I believe he had his producer credit taken off.
Yeah.
It was only afterwards that everybody knew that he was the person behind it, because he's like got this great joke of if people see Mel Brooks' Elephant Man, they're going to be like, where's the trunk? But it was just so kind of enthralling, and I ended up just thinking about it for so long afterwards. And yeah, coming back to it now, knowing a bit more about David Lynch, I'm kind of seeing it in a very different light, because so many of his films seem to just be like really damning critiques of Hollywood, and like I now kind of view The Elephant Man, I guess, a bit through that lens too, because it is so much about this man being exploited and this sort of like baying audiences that are so cruel and dehumanizing to him, and they're sort of desperate to kind of revel in his misery in some ways. So it's just like, oh yes, I can see how a man who had a terrible time on Dune might also feel this way about it. Like, yeah, the audience desperate to kind of partake in someone's downfall, and that only gets clearer if you kind of look at things like what's happening to all these starlets, or all these mental health problems, all the breakdowns people have had, everything that's happened in Me Too, and even everything that's just happened to Britney Spears and stuff. Like, all of the stuff in The Elephant Man does feel like David Lynch was warning us.
I am not an animal! I am
So did his work hit you immediately? When you saw The Elephant Man, was it an instant impact?
Well, I mean, Elephant Man is so different to the rest of them.
Yeah.
But I remember just thinking it was just so incredibly like beautiful and crisp, and like that John Hurt performance is just so staggering and theatrical and Shakespearean. It's like it's a much more classic movie in so many other ways. So then when I went back to Eraserhead, I was like, excuse me, what? Like, that was a sort of very different experience, but I just felt that I'm someone that always gets very, very vivid dreams, and I'm interested in horror, and it just felt like, oh, this man gets like nightmares and dream logic in a way that like really felt very special.
And so introduce us then to Mulholland Drive. I mean, how on earth do you introduce that to someone who's perhaps not heard of the film before?
Oh, God, what is Mulholland Drive? I mean, that is one of the great mysteries. And David Lynch refuses to tell us.
Yeah.
He refuses to describe anything about what his films are. It's essentially kind of a film of two halves, one of which is Naomi Watts' character meeting this gorgeous woman who has amnesia, and she herself is like a budding actress kind of from like a small Midwest town, and she has this like wonderful Hollywood dream sort of experience, but they are sort of investigating a murder on the side as well, and a director's life played by Justin Theroux is falling apart, but she like nails the audition. You can just see that she is the hero. The woman falls in love with her. It's almost like the first bit of like A Star Is Born or something like that, but with that little Lynchian nightmare.
I can't believe it. I'm just so excited to be here. I'm in this dream place.
This one comes highly recommended.
Dream place.
What are you doing?
Get out of the car.
And then she sort of reawakes and she's a different person and her life is in shambles and a Hollywood dream has just been like completely crushed. The woman that she falls in love with in the first half has a different name as well. She's actually kind of ended up with this very glamorous life and is getting married. The director, whose life was in shambles in the first half, has now had this like meteoric rise. And then we sort of build to, I don't know, a kind of nightmarish conclusion of which, like, you know, books could be written about, like, what is this film actually about?
I did put into Google in the week leading up to this just any kind of explanation on it, and I was thrilled to see someone had drawn a diagram, and like the diagram was fairly extensive, trying to break it all down, but solved absolutely nothing. What you said there about David Lynch not giving an answer to any of the questions, presumably that makes whatever conclusion we come up with both right and wrong.
Yeah, I mean, there's always this great quote from him where he says, like, people want to talk to me about my movies, but, like, the movies, that's the bit where I'm talking. So he kind of wants you to engage with what he's giving you, and then, like, whatever you take from it is what you take from it. And it's very interesting to me because he's so into, like, transcendental meditation, which is all about, like, kind of, like, letting thoughts and feelings hit you and then releasing them in such a way. And, like, that's kind of, I think, how you got to experience the film.
He sort of channeled that into Inland Empire quite a lot, didn't he? The film that was never written. My understanding of Inland Empire was there was never a completed script.
No.
And he was just feeding stuff on a day-by-day basis.
Yeah, and it took like 3 years or something, and it just kind of like, just a kind of free form of thoughts and ideas.
You have a new role to play, I hear.
Up for a role.
No, I definitely heard that you have it. Action.
I still think it's a very, very interesting film, but there is something that I think happens with quite a few directors where it's like you just get to a level of success and it's like, go do what you want, go make your film for 3 years with no script and the stars and see what comes out of it. And you do have a little moment about like maybe a producer on this who could kind of say no to a couple of these things, might have made Inland Empire, I think, kind of the masterpiece that Mulholland Drive is.
It's a story that happened yesterday, but I know it's tomorrow.
Don't you remember anything? How it was?
Well, Mulholland Drive The origins of this, of course, are in television, one of the most bracketed worlds that, you have to hit this running time. There's this bunch of executives who are holding you to like all the demographics you have to hit. And what I didn't appreciate was this was, late 1990s at Disney. This was originally being set up. Can you tell us a bit of that context and background?
Yeah, so it came out in 2001, but it was originally a TV pilot, and I believe it would have been kind of the first half of the film was conceived as being the pilot. It's just very interesting to me that I think it was just a bit too much for like a big institution like Disney. And Hollywood, it seems to be so obsessed with like telling love letters to itself, and like you see it at the Oscars all the time where it's like, oh yeah, we loved The Fabelmans, we loved Argo, we loved The Artist, all of that stuff. And I just, this vision of David Lynch coming with this like, hey, I'm going to show that this is actually a monster place full of nightmares for a TV studio, and them saying no thank you. I'm kind of not surprised that they weren't ready to see that vision of themselves.
I mean, it wasn't even streaming era, was it? It was full-on mainstream broadcast American networks, like the least risk-taking institutions to my eyes at that time.
Yeah, and I mean, like, those kind of set run times. I always get kind of slightly annoyed when people talk about Twin Peaks season 3 as being a movie, not television, because you actually see with that he's really good at the medium of television. They have breaks at the end of their episodes. He has like musical numbers that kind of punctuate things, and that's always been what makes Twin Peaks great, is that he was able to kind of really use the medium of television and its restrictions to their best. Whilst now, I guess with streaming and stuff, it's all a bit kind of more nebulous. But I'm glad this wasn't a TV show, though. I think it works perfectly as a film.
It's almost like he rebuilt it from stage one all over again.
Yeah, but with that kind of freewheeling spirit of like, I'm just going to kind of allow things to present themselves. There's kind of bits in this film that don't really go anywhere. There's kind of, like, I mean, the sequence at the diner, I think, is one of the greatest scenes in cinema, but like, it doesn't serve anything really much kind of beyond itself.
Oh, tell us a bit more about that sequence.
Oh my God, I love this sequence.
I got that impression.
I had a dream about this place.
It's kind of, to me, the most perfect encapsulation of like nightmare dream logic I've ever seen. Often in like nightmares, there's this kind of sense of foreboding and inevitability, and because your mind's kind of creating it, you know what's going to happen, but you have no ability to wake up and to stop it from happening. And like, I love horror, but to me, this is also one of the scariest scenes that's ever happened, because there's just this thing of like, it's inevitable and it's slow and it really takes its time. There's a couple of minutes of this man just walking to this dumpster behind the diner, having said that he knows that something really bad is waiting for him there. And then you get kind of a jump scare at the same time as having gotten the slowest creepiness. And I guess it's that thing with like, there's horror, there's terror, and there's eeriness, there's everything in it. And it kind of exists just, I suppose, to delight me, I suppose.
It's also, to my eyes, got one of the most sinister scenes of casting a movie I've ever seen. I mean, at heart, it is a Hollywood story, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Lynch famously had like a really miserable time when he was making Dune. I think he's often been someone who's aware of like being forced into like compromises, and like that there's a real kind of dark heart even in like those negotiations and stuff. So I believe it's probably pretty true to life of some of the kind of miserable meetings and casting situations people get.
Can you imagine the meeting David Lynch took for Return of the Jedi?
Oh, I didn't know this.
Yeah, they took him up to Skywalker to meet with George Lucas, and it was outlined like, here's everything on Return of the Jedi. Are you interested in directing it? And by the sounds of it, he just couldn't get out of the place fast enough.
I mean, yeah, Skywalker Ranch is a place that I would really like to visit. But yeah, no, if there's a time machine now, the ideal time would be to also watch that meeting.
Can you imagine?
I can't imagine two people with a further apart sensibility.
David Lynch's Ewoks, though. I mean, that I'd watch.
I would. Like, the Ewoks would probably, like, turn on each other in some really...
Yeah,
be carnivores.
Yo estaba bien
One of the things that really struck me about Mulholland Drive is we get a sequence where you get a singer belting out this rendition of Roy Orbison's Crying, the most sinister singing of that song of all time. I mean, it was always just seen as a relatively pleasant ballad or something like that. But the one thing that I hadn't appreciated about it was the volume levels that he sets on that are really quite extreme, and the way that he plays with sound is really quite extreme as well.
It's kind of such a strange thing that you can do with the most innocuous kind of songs, can't you? Like if you play like a nursery rhyme slightly too slow or slightly too loud, it all becomes really terrifying. But yeah, I mean, that use of that's such a lovely song, Roy Orbison's Crying. And I watched Mulholland Drive before I knew the song. Yeah. I remember going through a breakup and a friend of mine jokingly said, all you have to do is listen to Roy Orbison's Crying 10 times in a row and you will feel your heart healed. And
does that work?
It doesn't if you've seen Mulholland Drive.
I was going to
say. So I kind of came to it having had this nightmarish version of David Lynch playing it with that kind of just sinister undertone with those kind of really intense volumes. And I was just like, oh, good Lord, this is the last thing I need. This couldn't be making me feel worse, actually.
What you were saying about nursery rhymes, I couldn't agree more. And it is the fact that it felt like it was just piercing my ears. It was really chilling.
He's not afraid of making something viscerally unpleasant.
Yeah.
The sound design of that dumpster scene as well, it kind of, as it slowly builds, is so done. And he just gets pacing as well. And I think that's why he's able to take something like Roy Orbison's Crying and just make these slight changes in pace and volume and completely transform it.
Well, Layla, I've got a really easy question for you, because David Lynch, as we've talked about, he's famously pretty loath to discuss his own work and what it means. And so it's left to us to speculate, really. And Mulholland Drive is a film that sparked about 50 zillion Reddit threads in its own right, trying to decipher what it means. So, Layla, sort it all out for us. What does it mean?
So I think the explanation that works the best is that the second half of the film is reality. The second half is actually that this woman's dreams have been crushed. Her life has been ruined by this hideous director. She had this infatuation with this other actress that didn't go anywhere. And the first half of the film is her dreaming a kind of much more wonderful world for herself, where the kind of people who wronged her get their comeuppance, and she gets to kind of fall in love with the woman that she's infatuated to be, and also kind of live her kind of Hollywood dream of that audition that she nails and everyone loves her and everyone thinks that she's so talented. And then the kind of final sequence is kind of, I guess, I don't know, I suppose a bit Jacob's Laddery, that. I feel like those are the moments before she dies, essentially, is the kind of final bit of it. I think that explanation works the best.
Do you have a second best?
The second best is that essentially this is a kind of Star is Born without the bit where anybody becomes a star. So it's kind of your first act is kind of all the wonderful hopes and dreams and all these things coming true. Then she actually does legitimately become a huge success. And then the final bit is actually her downfall. So that is happening in order. But I think first act is all kind of a dream fantasy works best.
Well, he's not set it in any way as a binary puzzle, has he? I think that's what we can conclude from the multiple Reddit threads. Yeah. There's no X marks the spot or anything with it. Can I quote something you wrote about the film back at you?
Yeah.
You wrote that Mulholland Drive, and this was a piece you wrote for Sight and Sound's poll. You wrote that Mulholland Drive has the rare combination of perfection, even though chunks of it feel missing.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by chunks of it feel missing? Like plot holes, bits of the narrative? Is it that primal?
I guess the thing that chunks of it feel missing is there's so many things that don't get explained, and there's so kind of many loose ends that don't get tied up, but it's strangely to me still feels extremely satisfying, even though all these little questions go unanswered. And even and those little vignettes like the diner scene, we never find out who that is. People also recur, lines of dialogue recur. It feels like there might be a whole kind of sister film happening at the same time, and we're only kind of peeking into different parts of it. So yeah, it's perfect, even though it is so filled with holes.
One of the things that sometimes bugs me about films is I feel like we're presented with people whose lives just start when the credits roll and their lives stop when the credits stop. As soon as we're not looking at them anymore, the characters have stopped moving. It's what you said there. Here, it just feels like he's built far more than a film. He's built an ecosystem and a world of people who carry on even though we're not looking.
Yeah, it's just so nice to kind of experience films because so many of them are so bloated and so much exposition. You're so hungry for more with Mulholland Drive, where I think this is the film that kind of launched a million Lynch fans. I mean, this is kind of his highest profile film. This is the one that, if you're going to watch the first one, watch this because it will make you hungrier for so much more.
This would be your starting point for David Lynch.
I think so, because I think this is just like the most David Lynchian of the David Lynches. Whatever it is, it's kind of got all of the stuff that's great. It's kind of got the sinisterness, it's got the sound design. I mean, I'm not surprised at all that this film made Naomi Watts a movie star. He's incredible at directing women, and he's given her, Laura Dern, people, he's gotten their career best performances out of them. It's got the searing critique of Hollywood. It's beautiful. I mean, I love it.
You also said a little bit earlier that the film is quite difficult at times. It's not always the easiest one to wrap your head around, and yet it's the first one you go to as a David Lynch film. I find it surprisingly accessible, even though there's an awful lot going on. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, because I think it's kind of so on that tactical level, because it's even if you are completely confused by what's going on, no Reddit thread is going to make you feel satisfied with an explanation as to what it all means. You're still just kind of entering a world that is so beautifully done that just at a primal level, you are just kind of almost lizard brain, something clicks in. And it's that thing of tapping into dreams, tapping into nightmares, which is normally done so badly in TV and movies. I mean, I always think of the Friday the 13th films where it's just I've never seen a dream like this exist. I was watching a great show called Yellow Jackets the other day that had a load of dream sequences, and I was just I'm sorry, this is not at all how dreams work. They're so much weirder. And it's he was just able to get into something, I don't know, it unlocks a part of your brain somehow watching this, because it's not something that anybody else does well.
And can I ask you the ultimate question? Would teenage you put this on as a birthday party treat?
I think teenage me would have put this on loop as a birthday party
And how
treat.
much clip art would have been on the invite?
The clip art, I think that really would have been my pièce de résistance in terms of clip art. I would have had diner scenes. I would have had beautiful Hollywood images. There would have probably been some hellfire at the bottom to kind of show that there was a dark underbelly to all of this. Yeah. So a real shame that never got to happen.
All with a party bag at the end and a slice of cake, I hope.
Oh, what would you have to give people, I suppose, after something like that? Just
therapy?
Just a book on transcendental meditation, I think would be a good one.
The perfect birthday gift. Before we let you go, one thing we ask of all of our guests is to delve into the Studio Canal back catalogue for us and come up with a recommendation for a double bill. I mean, can you introduce us to yours?
So first, I'm going to go with Mel Brooks as The Producers, which I think is one of the funniest films that's ever been made. I adore Mel Brooks, and I also really, really dislike the current conversation that goes on about you can't be funny anymore because everybody has to be so censored and everyone's too sensitive and all of this stuff. And I was just no, you just have to look at Mel Brooks and you see how if you are funny enough and you are talented enough and clever enough, you can make the biggest taboos in the world absolutely hilarious and everyone's going to still love it.
What I love about Mel Brooks is he knows where his audience is and he knows where the line of his audience is. I think The Producers is an absolute masterpiece. Are you going to sing us a couple of songs?
Absolutely not. I'm completely tone deaf. Although I suppose that means that I would be more likely to be cast in Springtime for Hitler.
Excellent.
Springtime for Hitler and Germany.
And what are you pairing that with?
Oh, the opposite end of the spectrum. I mean, also kind of a comedy, a tragicomedy. It's Ousmane Sembène, who is kind of considered the father of African film. He's a Senegalese filmmaker that started in the 60s, and I believe this is his third film, second feature. It's called Mandabi. I was very, very, very happy when Studio Canal was behind its restoration, I think maybe 2 years ago, and we got to kind of see it in all of its gorgeous glory. It's so striking and colourful and clever. It's about a man who gets a money order from a nephew in Paris, kind of working class man living on the outskirts of Dakar, and it sort of all spirals into a tragedy, and it just kind of shows how like money begets debt, which kind of ruins your life, and actually kind of capitalism imposing itself on Senegal, you know, how devastating that can be for people. I absolutely love this film, and there's one of my favorite words in Arabic. It's called a muglab, and there's no word for it in English, but it's like Mandabi is essentially this, which is the gift that becomes a curse. So many African films are very difficult to get your hands on, and even the father of African film, so I think you can get this one, you can maybe get Black Girl, and perhaps another one or two is out there. But yeah, it's nice that now we're getting these restorations of what would otherwise be very difficult to access masterpieces.
Well, Mandabi is available on DVD and Blu-ray, and The Producers is available on the Studio Canal Presents channel as well. Leila Latif, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Both Mulholland Drive and The Elephant Man are available on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray, and also on the Studio Canal Presents channel on ITVX, Apple TV and Prime Video. A brand new restoration of Inland Empire will be released on Blu-ray on Monday the 19th of June. We've just got time for some news of what's been happening in the world of Studio Canal. Just as we're recording this podcast, Ken Loach's film The Old Oak is getting its debut at this year's Cannes Film Festival. We're going to be talking about it a lot more in the future on this podcast, and we'll have cinema release news for you soon.
They've been bought online, right, on an auction. They've never been to the village to have a look at the houses. They've never walked round the street. Our streets in our village, you know.
Just a reminder that the Wicker Man's 50th anniversary celebrations are ongoing this year, with the British horror classic getting a cinema re-release on the summer solstice, June the 21st, before heading to 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray this coming September. We'll have more on the film in a future episode of the podcast. The last time Studio Canal and Martin Scorsese worked together was on the hugely acclaimed Silence back in 2016. Now comes the news that they're back together to oversee an adaptation of the 2020 novel What Happens at Night from writer Peter Cameron. The winner of the Los Angeles Times Book Prize for Fiction, What Happens at Night follows an American couple who head to a snowy small town in Europe to adopt a baby. But checking into their hotel, things, as they often do, seem to take a turn. Scorsese is going to produce the picture, with Patrick Marber in the midst of adapting the book for the screen. Finally, our old friend Paddington has just picked up a prize. His pitch-perfect encounter with the late Queen during her Platinum Jubilee celebrations was named the most memorable moment at the BAFTA TV Awards. Paddington, of course, will be hard at work on his new movie shortly, with Paddington in Peru starting filming later this year. That's it for this episode of Studio Canal Presents. We'll be back next month for another dive into the Studio Canal catalogue as we delve into a Korean cinema classic, purchasing a ticket for Train to Busan. In the meantime, to find out more about Studio Canal films and the ITVX, Apple TV and Prime Video channel, you can visit www.studiocanal.co.uk or follow Studio Canal at Studio Canal UK on Twitter, Instagram and TikTok. And if you'd like to catch up on our previous episodes on everything from Terminator 2 and The Driver through to The Railway Children and The Third Man, you can find them all wherever you get your podcasts. Now though, I'm just off to prepare the invitations for my 10-year-old's birthday screening of Inland Empire. I'll see you back here next month. Ta-ta for now.